Well, welcome everyone. You're all very welcome here this afternoon. I want to welcome you to the Oneness of God and the Diversity of Religions, which is the first in a series of 5 today with Professor Ananta Ram Bachan from St. Olaf College down in Northfield. My name is Hans Gustafson. I'm the Associate Director of the J. Phillips Center for Interfaith Learning. The center, as many of you know, is a joint academic institute between both University of St. Thomas here in St. Paul and St. John's University up in Collegeville. And it also serves, of course, the College of St. Benedict and St. Joe's. As the Associate Director, I have the pleasure of working with my colleague and the Director of the Center, Professor John Merkel, who's here with us. Allow me to introduce him right now by way of saying a few words about him, after which I'll invite him up here to introduce our distinguished speaker and give an introduction in general to the series as a whole. Dr. John Merkel has been the director of the center since 2009, after serving as the associate director of the center for 13 years. He's also been the professor of the Department of Theology at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, where he's been teaching since 1977. He's been deeply involved in Christian-Jewish dialogue for more than 3 decades and has given hundreds of lectures, especially having to do with Jewish theology and Jewish theology and with Christian faith in relation to Judaism. He's written and edited 4 books, including Faith Transformed, Christian Encounters with Jews and Judaism in 2003, and in 2009 he published Approaching God, The Way of Abraham Joshua Heschel. It's been a pleasure with working with him and learning from him over the past 6 or 7 years since I've been with the center. And I know that these institutions, St. John's University and the University of St. Thomas, are indeed lucky to have him directing the center. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Merkel.
Thank you very much, Hans. I wasn't expecting an introduction, but I greatly appreciate your kind words. And now it's my turn to introduce today's very distinguished speaker. First, I want to say it's just a great pleasure and honor working with Hans Gustafson. He has been doing marvelous work for the center for the last 6, 7 years, as you say. I think 6 probably. He's just made my life and my work that much more enjoyable and that much easier. It's great to have him here. His office is here. Mine is up at St. Benedict's and St. John's. And some of you perhaps know that our center, the housing for our center, was just moved from a little place on Grand Avenue over to Portland Avenue. We have wonderful space there that we share with the Muslim Christian Dialogue Center, and we hope that you'll come and visit us there. Hans is there more frequently than I, but I would love to see you there as well. We had a wonderful grand opening just about a week or so ago with both Hindu and Jewish music, and yes, it was a wonderful evening. So in any case, this series, as I should also say, I see Karen Sherman here, who was working for the center for many years before Hans, and who it was also a great honor to work with Karen. It's great to have you back. Thanks for being here. This is the first in a series of 5 lectures on the oneness of God and the diversity of religions. And the inspiration for this series is an article that was published back in 1966 by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel called "No Religion is an Island." And so I thought, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the publication of this landmark article, I would like to have a series focused on a theme in that essay of Heschel's. The theme is this. Heschel said in that essay that he believed that religious diversity is the will of God. And so what I have done is asked scholars from 5 different traditions, including Heschel's own tradition. We're going to end with the Jewish scholar the fall of next year. But we're starting this semester with our distinguished guest, Hindu scholar Ananta Ram Bachan. And next week at the same time, but not at the same place, over in McNeely, right, Hans? McNeely 100, we'll have an outstanding Sikh scholar join us, Rahuldeep Singh Gill, speaking to the same subject. And then next semester we'll have a Christian and a Muslim speaking to the issue. And then, as I said, in the fall of next year, we'll conclude with the Jewish speaker. So what I've asked each of the speakers to do is to explain something about their own tradition and what might lend support from their own tradition, or what might even challenge Heschel's statement, his statement of belief from their own tradition, about the diversity of religions being the will of God, or another way we could put it, the diversity of religions being a divine good for human beings. So it's a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce to you and to welcome here to our campus again, Dr. Ananta Ram Bachan. And I'm delighted that he is the first speaker and the representative of the Hindu tradition in this particular series. He's professor of religion, philosophy, and Asian studies at St. Olaf College. He's the only one of our speakers that doesn't have to take a plane to get here in this series. All the others are coming from elsewhere, from significant distances. He received his MA and his PhD degrees from the University of Leeds. He's been deeply involved in interfaith relations for several decades, particularly Hindu-Christian dialogue. He's lectured in many, many countries and has been an active participant in the dialogue program of the World Council of Churches and in consultations of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue at the Vatican. At the invitation of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Ram Bachan delivered the distinguished Lambeth Lecture in the Lambeth Palace in London. He's the author of many books, including most recently A Hindu Theology of Liberation, which I very highly recommend to you. I think it's a real work of spiritual brilliance, and it's written in a most accessible way. It combines depth and breadth and accessibility. I hope you'll take the opportunity to either purchase that book or check it out of the library. He's also the author of numerous articles that have appeared in both scholarly and in popular journals. The British Broadcasting Company, the BBC, has transmitted 25 of his lectures around the world, and he has twice delivered the invocation at the White House for the Hindu celebration of Diwali. Please join me in welcoming this very distinguished scholar, Dr. Ananta Ram Bachan.
Thank you, John. Greetings, everyone. Let me begin by thanking my friend, Professor John Merkel, for his generous words of introduction to me, and to thank John and Hans, Professor Hans Gustafson, for inviting me to deliver the first lecture in this series on the oneness of God and the diversity of religions. It's an honor and a joy to be here and to have this conversation with all of you. I really appreciate the fact that in this series The J. Phillips Center is expanding the dialogue, not only with my involvement, but also, as John mentioned, following me is Professor Rahul Deep Singh Gill from California, who will speak to the topic from the Sikh tradition. So the more voices, the more traditions, the richer the conversation and the learning for all of us. So thank you very much, and I'm, of course, happy to recognize a few friends here. Rabbi Norm Cohen, who was my colleague at St. Olaf for many years, teaching, and also Ted is here, and others. So it's very, very nice to see all of you. I am going to organize my presentation around a text which was distributed to you. So please be sure that you have a copy of this text. I'll ask you to refer to it from time to time so I can be a little more organized in what I want to say to you this afternoon. Yeah. But let me begin with a few very quick, brief, and general comments about the Hindu tradition. I wanted to signal the fact that this is a tradition of great diversity and complexity. I mentioned the fact of diversity because I think what I'm going to share with you today is in so many ways a response to the complexities of its own internal diversity. But it's good to remember that the word Hindu doesn't really tell us anything about this tradition. It doesn't refer to a belief, a doctrine, a teaching, or a practice. It's a geographical name. It originates from the name of a river, the Indus River. Hindu is just a variation in the pronunciation of the name of this river. So originally, it was used to describe the people who lived in the territory drained by the Indus, Sindhu, Hindu river, communities that were already very different and diverse in what they professed and in what they practiced. This also means that we are talking about a highly decentralized tradition. Hindu traditions do not have the central institutions that are characteristic of most or many religious traditions. There is no single person representing or speaking authoritatively for all Hindus. The tradition does not have a historical founder. Its most ancient and authoritative texts are the Vedas. There are 4 Vedas, and the oldest of which is the Rig Veda, dated conservatively perhaps 2300 BCE. And I'm going to share the text that you have before you is from the Rig Veda, from one of the hymns of the Rig Veda. So I ask you to look at this text, and I have 2 of the verses from this famous hymn. Speech hath been measured out in 4 divisions. The wise who have understanding know them. 3 kept in close concealment cause no motion. Of speech, men only speak the 4th division. They call him Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni, and he is the noble winged Garutman. The one being the wise speak of in many ways. They call it Agni, Yama, Matarishwan. Now, in these 2 verses, I'll ask you to focus in particular on the line, the one being, the wise speak of in many ways. In Sanskrit, which is the language of this text, the one being is called, and this is what is used in the Veda, Ekam Sat. Ekam means one, and Sat is the being. Ekam Sat. The wise, the word for the wise is Vipraha. Vipraha, many, Bahuda, Vadanti, speak. So the one being, the wise speak of in many ways. In Sanskrit, the verb usually comes at the end of the sentence. So in Sanskrit, it would be Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. One being, the wise speak of in many ways. Now, as you can see, the verse 45 of this text provides a context for verse 46 with an insight about the nature of human speech. It does so by presenting the totality of speech or the total potential of speech as consisting of 4 quarters. And human speech comprises, human spoken words comprise only a quarter of the total speech potential. In describing 3/4 of speech as kept in close concealment, causing no motion, perhaps the text is reminding us even of the language of silence, the ultimate inexpressibility of the one being. So I think this verse is suggesting to us that our modes of speaking, our articulated speech, does not exhaust all the modes of communication or the potentiality of all speech. Now, here is the first question that I want to raise about this text. What might be, or what is perhaps the context that we might presume for a text like this? Given the age of the Rig Veda, as I said, 23 BCE, perhaps the text is addressing an intra-religious diversity, a situation of intra-religious diversity. And it is perhaps possible also that in this diverse religious context, different names were being used, different claims were being made for the superiority of one name of God or one form of God over and above all others. Communities were seeing themselves as rivals and as worshippers of different deities. Because why else would the poet, the rishi, as we say in Sanskrit, the inspired teacher, speak of in this way? Why would the teacher call attention to the oneness of God, Ekam Sat, and also draw attention to the many ways in which people speak of this one, unless there were many ways that were being spoken? So in other words, we see here an attempt to say across the ages that the God of the other is not false, is not non-existent, is not subordinate, but a different way of naming, a different way of imagining the one being, the Ekam Sat. Having said that, I admit, and we have to think hard about these kinds of questions, I admit that it raises all kinds of problems if we try to lift this text from the Veda, from an intra-religious context, and apply it uncritically to a different historical or different even interreligious context where the incompatibilities might even be greater. But it is something that we have to think about, and it's a kind of question that theologians are working on, I often cite the recent book by the Christian theologian Miroslav Volf, who teaches at Yale, published Allah, a Christian response. And basically, he was addressing this question in his book. Can we say, or what does it take for us to say that the God of the Christian tradition is the God of Islam? You know, what compatibilities are necessary? How much compatibility is necessary to say the two traditions are in fact speaking about one being, the Ekam Sat? It's a very significant question. But clearly, what we get in this verse that is, I think, is profoundly helpful to us as we think of the oneness of God and the diversity of religions is a reminder from deep within the ancient Hindu tradition that the one being, the Ekam Sat, is always more than we can define, than we can describe, than we can comprehend with our finite symbols, our finite languages. No representation, symbolic or verbal or otherwise, can ever be complete. I want to share with you 3 texts from the Vedas. These texts are from the end of the Vedas or the Upanishads. And they're very beautiful, intriguing texts about the limits of language. And this is a very common kind of text in the Vedas. So Taittiriya Upanishad, that from which, and that here refers to the Ekam Sat, the one being. That from which the mind and all words return, having failed to reach. That from which the mind and all words, all language, return, having failed to reach. And then Kena Upanishad delights in the language of paradox. It is known to him to whom it is unknown. He does not know it to whom it is known. It is unknown to those who know well, and known to those who do not know. And then the third one, that which is not uttered by speech, but that by which speech is expressed. So another translation would be that which we can't speak about, but that because of which we speak. Know that alone to be the infinite, the Ekam Sat, and not this which is being worshipped. This here referring to an object in time and in space. And to show that this resonates in other traditions, the Christian tradition, I just wanted to share these 2 texts with you from Gregory. God is incapable of being grasped by any term, language limits, or any idea, imagination, or any other conception. And then there is Aquinas. Everything is knowable according to its actuality, but God, whose being is infinitely knowable. Now, no created intellect can know God infinitely. Hence, it is impossible that any created intellect should comprehend God. This is a meeting place for our traditions. This ultimate incomprehensibility of the Ekam Sat, the infinite one, is an important place where traditions can come together in humility. Because if I acknowledge the limits of all that I can say and all that I can know, I can only profess my tradition with humility. A humility that should open me to be enriched by and to learn from people of other traditions. So when we employ our limited language, as this text tells us, we only speak 1/4 of the total potential of language. Our language will be diverse. We will speak differently. We'll speak Bahuda in many ways. That's the word in this text. Not because Ekam Sat is many, but because our language is limited. It is finite language. And with this finite language, we struggle to describe that which is linguistically transcendent, symbolically transcendent. We'll use many names as this text gives us. Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni, Garutman, Yama, Matarishwan. Not because the one is many, but because in a sense we are many. And our language is diverse. We have a particular genre in the Hindu tradition that makes this point in a very special way. It is a genre of, in Sanskrit we speak of Sahasranama, the 1,000 names. So each form of God has 1,000 names. In fact, it's more than 1,000 names, but perhaps because of limits, we speak of the genre as the genre of the 1,000 names of Shiva, 1,000 names of Vishnu, 1,000 names of Durga. And these 1,000 names are also used liturgically in Hindu worship. In Hindu temples, they will be recited often as part of the worship. Just a few of the 1,000 names of Shiva. And you can believe me that a good Hindu priest will recite all of these from memory as part of the temple worship, and offer a flower with each name as he is reciting. But here is where I think the text speaks to our subject matter. Acknowledging the diversity of these names and ways of speaking, the Rig Veda text is unambiguous in its assertion that God is one. Ekam Sat. Ekam Sat. It is the one that is spoken of diversely. This is the central insight that is being brought here to us. So those who name, the teacher is saying, you who name this one, and your favorite name is Indra or Mitra or Varuna or Agni or Yama or Matarishwan, please know that these are all names of the one. You are not addressing yourselves to different realities, but you are addressing yourself to the one true being, the Ekam Sat. Your name alone is not true and the other one is false. Your name alone does not include all others. They are all names of the one. So this text is a rejection of a literal kind of simplistic polytheism, but it's an affirmation of a more complex teaching about the oneness of God and yet the manyness of ways of speaking about the one. You know, this is a question that I leave with you. I can speak of the way in which, Hindus think about it, because there are many Hindus already who go beyond this intra-Hindu context and cite this text to speak about the oneness of God, and including in that oneness the Christian tradition, the Islamic tradition, and the Jewish tradition, arguing that the Hindu tradition does not allow for a Jewish God or Christian God or a Muslim God, but a Jewish understanding of God, a Christian understanding of God, a Muslim understanding of God, but that God is Ekam Sat. God is one. But what the text is also suggesting to us is that we speak in different and sometimes even in contradictory ways about this one. But the oneness of the one is not compromised by the manyness of speech. So, we do have within the intra-religious diversity of the Hindu tradition, we have very theistic traditions, and we have very non-theistic traditions as well. Traditions that, speak of God as father, mother, friend. And then there are those traditions that speak of God as ultimate reality and less theistic language. What is very interesting about the text also is that it uses all of the personal names, or at least a fair number of the personal names for God that were available at that time, and they are listed here. But when it speaks of the one being, it uses an inclusive term or inclusive terms. Ekam Sat. Sat is the ancient Sanskrit term that we use to describe ultimate reality. That which is ultimately real and true is called Sat. So true speech is called Satya. But Sat as an abstract now names that which is ultimately real, that can include both personal and non-personal understandings of the one. So in other words, as we can see in the text, it doesn't, while given all the personal names, does not use a personal name to say, this is the name of all, but leaves aside all the personal names and goes to a term, Ekam Sat, that can include all of the personal names that are used. What do we do with this insight? What difference does it make for us in a context of religious diversity? I think that this insight certainly helps us to think of persons in other traditions not as strangers with alien, false, or rival deities, but as fellow beings whose God is our God. This is the implication that Mahatma Gandhi drew from this text. And I have a quotation from him at the top of my slide. I believe in the absolute oneness of God and therefore of humanity. What though we have many bodies, we have but one soul. The rays of the sun are many through refraction, but they have the same source. I cannot therefore detach myself from the wickedest soul, nor may I be denied identity with the most virtuous. And of course, something from Rabbi Herschel, who said, there is no insight more disclosing. God is one, humanity is one. There's no possibility more frightening. God's name may be desecrated. And for Herschel, as you know, the desecration of the human being is the desecration of God, whose image is enshrined in the heart of every living being. So the text has the potential to transform how we see the other, to overcome alienation with the other by affirming the Ekam Sat, the one being towards whom we are all oriented. And in a sense, the text is not asking, as you can see, it's commending the many names. Indra, Mitra, Varuna. It's not asking that those names be given up. But at the same time, I'll say something a little more about this. to look beyond the names that are close to us, the names that are familiar to us, to look beyond the preferred symbols that we associate with the divine, the way in which we represent the divine in the language of our own culture and history, but to know also that the divine is much greater than any particular tradition. We don't confine the one within the boundaries of our tradition, even though there's great value in the familiar ways of speaking and the intimate ways of speaking, which are necessary and precious to our traditions. Differences. So here's a text acknowledging the limits of language, the multiplicity of ways in which we speak. But I think it would be wrong to rush to the conclusion, and this would be wrong if done by Hindus, that the text is minimizing differences or saying that differences are insignificant. I don't read this text as a minimization of religious differences or claiming that all ways of speaking are identical or the traditions are identical. I don't think that there is a minimization here of religious differences. One may make the argument that instead of underplaying differences, we may read this text as drawing our attention to the diverse ways of speaking about the one. And this is why I translated that one line for you. The one being the wise speak of in many ways. Who is speaking of in many ways? Not the ignorant. It's the vipraha. It's written there. That the wise. It is the wise who are speaking differently. It's learned people who know their traditions are speaking differently. And if wise people speak differently, then we better listen. Because there's something to be learned from the different ways in which they are speaking. So vipraha bahuda vadanti. The wise are speaking differently. So theological diversity is not being dismissed here as a consequence of ignorance. What is ignorance here is simply to claim superiority for one name. It is not to use a particular name. So I read this text, and I read this in this way to my fellow Hindus, that this text is inviting us to a respectful and also inquiring response to religious diversity. We must not hastily or arrogantly denounce speech merely because it's different from what we have heard, or because the name is not our name, or it is not a familiar name. We just marginalize it simply because we have not grown up with it. It is not the name of God that is used within our own community or own lineage. In other words, we should not identify or equate wisdom with our way of speaking, or assume that if people were wise, they would all speak identically. Wisdom is not always manifested in consensus. So when encountering the religious traditions of our neighbors, we would do better to assume that their traditions flourish, their traditions endure, even though they speak differently from us, because their traditions carry great meaning, great value historically. But we will not learn until our disposition is a humble one, and we cease condemning that which is different. I learn a great deal, and I continue to learn a great deal. Certainly, I always welcome those places where my tradition intersects with others. But my own deepest learning occurs when I encounter that which is different, and I am challenged to think anew by an insight from someone of another religious tradition that really stretches my understanding about the nature of God. I learn from the Bahuda, the different way of speaking. And I know that, and I know you will encounter Hindus who cite this text and speak of religious differences as though they are only all semantic differences, who reduce religious differences to semantic ones. And I don't agree with that approach or that way of reading this important text. All ways of speaking are not equal. If our different ways of speaking about God are important, the text should not be read as affirming that all ways are equally true to the one. We can't say that. The text does indicate the one as a common referent, but it doesn't tell us that every way of speaking is equally true to this referent. And today we know, in every religious tradition, we can identify, we could find speech that about the one that is used to stir hate, to awaken fear, to instigate violence, to demean, to denounce, to oppress, to legitimize injustice. Certainly, such speech can't be equal to the speech that invites us to ways of being compassionate and generous and just, and speech that affirms human dignity and the equal worth of all beings. So it would be naive and dangerous to read such a text as speaking of the equal validity of every way of speaking. And I don't think you would find a Hindu philosopher or a Hindu theologian who would say that all ways of speaking are equally true or valid. Sometimes you have to search a little deeper to find the norm. But believe me, there are normative judgments made within the Hindu tradition about different ways of speaking. Let me move to an important practice and teaching in the Hindu tradition that I think brings a lot of this together, as well as what does it mean, the oneness of God and the diversity of traditions in terms of the kind of praxis you might find in a Hindu temple. And here's a word that I want to introduce to you. It's not in the text that I gave to you. It's the teaching of the Ishtadeva, which is also a beautiful Sanskrit word. Deva here means God or the one, and Ishta comes from the root to choose. So the chosen one is called the Ishtadeva, the one that you choose. The God that you choose is called the Ishtadeva. Again, developed in a context of intra-religious diversity in India, where you have, again, many names, many forms, and from among these, we choose one. We commit ourselves to one form, one name, Vishnu, Shiva, Durga, or any of the other choices that that may have existed. And there is no doubt also that there would have been times in the Hindu tradition when these different Ishtadevas or these different devas were viewed as different or even competing deities, and the communities seen as rival communities, and many of the myths associated with figures like Vishnu or Shiva represent them in terms of rivalry or even hierarchical subordination of one over the other. But here, it is in this context that you have the Ishtadeva teaching emerging. As these communities interacted, they understood each other better, they were enriched by each other. There was a movement from, as we see in the Rig Veda text, from exclusive understandings to those that affirmed that we are all choosing differently, but we are choosing from the one. We're choosing of the one. And even though you're committed to your Ishtadeva, you do not choose exclusively, since you do so with the knowledge that other Hindus have chosen differently, and all, as I said, all choices relate to the one. There is firmness of commitment, but not an exclusivity of commitment. And this is where I come back to that point about the influence of the fact that we also have this cultural creation in our own understanding of God. So here is I wanted to show you an artistic representation of an incident in the life of Krishna, one of the God forms of the Hindu tradition. This is a very well-known scene. It's a dance, the Ras Leela dance. And as you can see, he multiplies himself to dance with every young girl, the gopis. And they do this beautiful circle of dance. And each girl is with him fully, as represented in the drawing. Now, what is told in this story is that everyone who dances fully with God, Krishna. But if at any time in the dance you thought that he was dancing with you alone, he will disappear from you. You would stand alone. He's no longer with you if you seek to possess him. You lose him. And so this makes a very beautiful and important point. Here is Ishtadeva at our temple here in Maple Grove. Some of you might have visited. So this is a photograph of the shrine of the Maple Grove temple. And as you can see, there are several temples within the worship space, and each one is an Ishtadeva. Now, many of these Ishtadevas are regional. They determine depends on where you come from in India, you might have your Ishtadeva might be determined by your geographical origin. It may be Ganesha if you came from Mumbai. It may be Durga or Kali if you come from Kolkata. It might be Shiva if you come from Chennai. Krishna if you came from Vrindavan or somewhere in the north. But all of the major Ishtadevas are there in the worship area of the Maple Grove temple. And when Hindus visit the temple, as they do now because of the structure of the work week on a weekend, each would go to the shrine of his or her Ishtadeva, knowing that fellow Hindus are going to other shrines. What makes it work is the understanding that there are different shrines of the one, the Ekam Sat. Each shrine is a beautiful and precious way in which the one has been thought of for generations and generations in India. So, if you're from the shrine area, people at different shrines. And here also, within the range of the shrines, is also the Jain shrine at the temple. I put that one because, Jainism is a non-theistic tradition. In fact, some may say it's even atheistic because it doesn't have a teaching of a creator God. But there's also a Jain shrine among the many shrines, and Jains worship at this shrine. In fact, it's quite interesting, quite common in the United States. There are several temples, Hindu temples, with Jain shrines that are also served by the same priests. The same Hindu priests who serve the other deities also serve at the Jain shrine, and they're performing similar puja there. Here's another, again, these are Ishtadevas from the region of Orissa, from the area of Jagannath, Puri in Orissa. I put these because, as you can see, they are Ishtadevas or murtis that also have a very strong folk tradition in the art. A lot of the other murtis are marble and carved, exquisitely. Here you have, these are wooden murtis, wooden icons in the temple, but they have a special place also because they are forms of the one. And all of the festivals associated with these are observed and celebrated. I'm coming to the conclusion of what I wanted to say with you today, but I want to cite for you a very famous text. This one is from the Bhagavad Gita that also speaks to our topic, the one God and the diversity of religions. And here, this is a text from Krishna speaking, who is honored in the Hindu tradition as an embodiment of divinity, or as the avatar. And the text is, howsoever people approach me, so do I accept them. For the paths people take from every side are mine. So here's an acknowledgement from the divine side of diversity, of religious diversity, but also an affirmation that I recognize this. I recognize that I am sought in different ways by different people because of the richness of human diversity. But the claim that I don't, if you take this as the voice of God, then it implies, that I don't look to one way to be named or to be worshipped. I understand that I am sought in many ways by people from all sides. The path they take from all sides are mine. And this has found articulation in so many ways in the Hindu tradition. I just give you some examples. Ramakrishna, a very famous contemporary teacher, the guru of Swami Vivekananda, he used a more homely example, very similar to this text, and talks about God as a mother who doesn't give, the same meal to all of her children, fish pilau, because some of them can't digest it and some prefer the liquid soup. He has many examples that speak in this way. This teaching is also articulated in a theology of the bhavas. A bhava means a disposition, a unique, emotive perhaps, but not only emotive, affective way of relating to the divine, depending on the diversity of human nature. So there is the bhava of contemplation. There are some people whose primary mode of relating to the Ekam Sat is the contemplative mode. They are not, you don't find them singing ecstatic ecstatically, but they worship in the tranquility of inner contemplation. And then there's the dasya bhava, the active mode of relationship. I give Gandhi as an example, one who regards oneself as a servant of God and feels he or she has a responsibility to go out into the world and to serve God in other beings, dasa, or the servant of God. The friendship relationship, sakhya bhava. God is seen primarily as a friend. These are not exclusive, but they're primary modes of relating to God. Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita is an example of someone who looked to Krishna as sakha, as friend. And then Vatsalya bhava, very special to the Hindu tradition because of the teaching on divine incarnation. God as child, one honors and celebrates and reveres God as divine child, and there's there are liturgies and liturgies based around the understanding of God as a vulnerable child. This is just a painting from a well-known scene between Krishna and his mother, and these are incidents celebrated in song and in dance, music. He's playing outside of his house. His friends say that he's put some mud into his mouth. His mother calls him and is trying to force open his mouth, and he's resisting, allowing her to look into his mouth. Eventually, she looks into his mouth and she doesn't see, mud, but she sees the universe, the planets inside of her child. But then the text says, but he makes her forget very quickly because he wants to be her child. He wants her to think of him only as child, so there's intimacy. And she can't do that if she thinks that her child is divine. So he has to also have a veil of forgetfulness so that he can enjoy and she can enjoy the joys of motherhood with her child. And then finally, Madhura Bhava, God as lover, God as beloved, Radha, Krishna, the most intimate of the relationships. So I leave you with this text, the one being, the wise speak of in many ways. I have shared with you what I think some of the insights of this text, but also where I see that there's need for further reflection, discernment, application of this text. But for me, this is a text that motivates me to build dialogical relationships with people of other religious traditions. If you are also speaking of the one being, the Ekam Sat, about which my tradition speaks, I want to hear what you say. I want to learn from you. I'm enthusiastic. I'm eager to hear about this one, to whom we're all relating. So if a text, for me, a single text can awaken me to the limits of my own tradition and my own ways of speaking, and open my imagination to learning from what my neighbors of other traditions are saying, it's a precious text. It's one to which I will return again and again and again. And that's why I made it the center of my sharing with you this afternoon. So I will stop here, and hopefully I will learn something from your questions.
And we ask if you do have a question that raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone so we can get it recorded into the video stream. With their hand up.
Thank you for your lecture. I curious if you would talk about the concept of reincarnation in terms of development of different philosophies, spiritual traditions, and also if you want to include, they talk about text and language. How do you feel like the English language seems like a dominant language now in the world? However, it doesn't include a lot of concepts that other spiritual traditions have as far as our consciousness goes.
As and you have other teachers here in the audience who teach different traditions, and I just respond first to your second question. It's a very, very, very valuable question. There are people in the Hindu world today who make a rather extreme argument that this tradition cannot be understood in any language but the language of its original text. Obviously, I don't hold that position, or else I would not be teaching in the United States for over 30 years. But you're quite right in the sense that we have to always tread very carefully with language. And as much as I struggle in my classrooms to help my students get a sense of what is distinctive and what is unique and special about a tradition, I often have them learn the original words and say, these words, this is a word that can't be translated. And but you can learn, you can build a vocabulary that gets you close, to the meaning of these terms. And I think that we are in a very dynamic space with all of this today, in the sense that moving as we are to living in more and more diverse societies and communities, where our children and our grandchildren will be learning much more about other traditions from their friends and interacting with them in schools and in colleges. There will be much more fluidity in terms that will be happening in this kind of learning space. But I take your question as one that is of deep value, and we must not be too eager to translate the concepts of one tradition into another in ways that compromise or might dilute, the significance and meaning of those traditions. But as teachers, we do have to do some translation, or else we will be living within boundaried worlds. As far as reincarnation and its significance for Hindu thinking about this topic, the oneness of God and diversity, I think that in one of its outcomes, as it is also, I think, for the Buddhist tradition, at least those Buddhists who affirm teachings on samsara and karma, that it has taken away the urgency to want to proselytize. That's one impact about it. Certainly, it hasn't taken away, or should not take away, the desire to share, because in the Hindu tradition there's a great value for sharing one's tradition with the other. But to share and to let the other grow in his own, her own time and space and way also comes out of a perception that life is a long journey of learning. And it's also a teaching, I think, about hope. There is hope for all. There is hope for all. There is a continuous growth, or at least the potential for continuous growth across life experiences and hope for all. So there's no need for me to, to strive assiduously to bring you to my point of view. I share it with you in the spirit of generosity, and you receive it or not, and you integrate it or not. My role is only to share. So I think it does have implications for how people of these traditions think about diversity. I'll just give you one example.
Yeah, I very much liked your talk. Here's something that I've always found fascinating. I don't quite know what to make of it, but the three great Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, I suppose they're closer to each other than Hinduism in one respect, is that they have this strong doctrine of creation ex nihilo, which I don't think you see in Hinduism. God creates from pre-existing things or from himself. But I find it fascinating that in one way, Christianity is closer to Hinduism. And that's this notion of God became incarnate. You don't find that really in Judaism or Islam, and I think Islam just finds that shocking and sort of blasphemous. And when you have the slide up there with the mother and the child, right, this infant, but she looks into his mouth, sees the universe. I was reminded of this amazing verse from Luther's "From heaven above to earth I come." It's so sweet, especially in the German. It says, "O Lord, thou hast created all. How did you come to be so small, to sweetly sleep in manger bed, where lowly cattle lately fed?" And there, Hinduism and Christianity seem much closer to each other than Christianity is to the sister religions. I'm not sure what to make of it, but I find it fascinating.
I think you are correct. And certainly in the texts that discuss avatar, which is the Sanskrit term that is used, there is a deep sense of the mystery of this, ultimate mystery of the divine becoming human, with all of the paradoxes that are involved in trying to describe what this means. And it's a good point of meeting, as you point out, and at the same time, it's a good starting place now to talk about what do we mean by incarnation, how they might be similar, and how they might be different as well. So, for example, the Hindu texts speaking about Krishna spend most of the pages of the text on his childhood. There's very little, they don't seem to be interested too much in the adulthood of Krishna, but much more in his childhood. Because there seems to be something about God as child that is especially appealing. Perhaps, as some have suggested, it awakens us or calls attention to something that is playful in divine nature. There is something that is celebratory in divine nature. There is something that rejoices in relationships, like the mother and the child. Whereas, you see in the Christian text, they move very quickly through the childhood of Jesus to the teaching and then the crucifixion. So this very difference is these are all fascinating places of learning. Why this great emphasis on the child, Krishna, not so much on the adult Krishna compared to. But you're correct, and the point you make also, or what you note about nature of creation, is also a very good place for dialogue.
My question is a little more historical. I'm interested in, you began by saying that there's no Hinduism, that it's a geographical designation more than a substantive one. It's interesting in the history of any religion, when it comes to think of itself or to be thought of as an ism. And we historians are trained to look for the diversities within a tradition as much as the commonalities. So my question is, we do speak about Hinduism.
Yeah.
Is there a sense, and if you read the newspapers, we'll hear about interactions between Hindus and Muslims that suggest a strong sense of collective identity that's at stake or at risk. Is there some point at which Hinduism becomes an ism and thinks of itself that way? Is this just a function of modern nationalism? I do not know if my question really registers.
No, it's a fine, it's an excellent question. I wish I could give you the exact date and the person's name when the term Hinduism was first used. And it was actually used first by a missionary, not by, wasn't an indigenous description. Yeah, and it was because, the fact is that it's a very rich and diverse tradition. There's no doubt about it. And but in seeking to engage it, the early missionaries in India had a lot of difficulty. What are you going to engage? Which version of Hinduism? So they had to sort of homogenize certain strands of the tradition in order to contest it, in order to engage it. Now, while it is true, I emphasize a lot on the diversity, but I have to say also through a historical process of interaction, it's possible now to speak of certain shared practices and teachings that even within this diversity cut across, the multiple traditions. So whether it's formal or whether, people do engage the text in special ways, I think the definition of orthodoxy within the Hindu traditions is allegiance to the Veda. The Veda as a sacred text is one of those common features. And then one of the earlier questioners mentioned belief in karma, samsara, cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The karma samsara worldview is also widely shared across Hindu traditions. They all speak about moksha or liberation, even they have different understandings of what it might mean. So, today what is happening, you see this confluence of commonality and difference. But sometimes, the urge to speak about a common Hindu tradition, to homogenize the Hindu tradition, doesn't always come from good motives. Let me put it in that way, from good motives. A lot of the rhetoric of the Hindu tradition is a politicized form of Hinduism, which has been championed by movements that are advocating for a Hindu state in India. And so they believe that if you want to have a state, you also have to have one ideology, religious ideology. But then the question we ask is, whose ideology? Whose version of the Hindu tradition?
My question, when out in the villages in Tamil Nadu, it seems to me like the people really understand their various village deities to be separate, distinct entities. And for them, or at least a lot of them, it seems like they're not emblematic of some greater reality, that that it is a sort of polytheism, and that, issues of the Upanishads and the Vedas, in my experience, really don't seem to be on their minds. So I'm just wondering what you would say about that.
It's a very good observation. And this is, the observation comes from, empirical observation in India. It's a vast and diverse subcontinent. And certainly, within the vastness and diversity of it, you would find places where they're very local, whether they're called in Sanskrit, grama devatas or village deities. And they see that deity as limited to their own geography. It doesn't have a larger pan-Hindu or pan-universal significance. So that's also part of, I don't contest that point, Ted. They are not engaging theologically with other traditions or trying to think about the nature of God as a creator of all. The religious practice of such places is much more to ensure that life goes well. The deity is ensuring, fertility, good crops, overcoming of disease, and so on. Their discourse is not informed by notions of liberation or moksha. It's more pragmatic. God is a more pragmatic, functional reality for them.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about that within India we've had experiences of religions coming together, like from the time of Akbar, attempt to find a way for worshipping Hinduism and Islam. And even Gandhi wanted to, from a very much devout perspective, wanted to create a shared outlook from multi-religious perspective. And yet at times it's been so hard, and so divisive. And even though in terms of practices, I mean, there are Hindus who go to churches. I've been to a church in Madras where all the different religious communities come to worship. Or I'm told there are dargahs in UP where Hindus go to worship at these Muslims. So in terms of practices, everyday practices, these things continue. And yet we have so much violence based on religious identity. So I don't know if you could if you have some explanation. I'm sorry, a political scientist is putting you into a difficult situation.
It's the most difficult interreligious issue in India today. And Manju, I think that the most important dialogue that is not happening in India today is the dialogue between Hindus and Muslims. It's an urgent necessity. It's very difficult dialogue because the religious dimension of it gets enmeshed with so much of the political, and in particular all of the tensions that continue to exist between the states of India and Pakistan. Everything is seen through the lens of that rivalry. But you also cited an interesting, as Ted spoke of the local ground, and you're right. I mean, there have been great teachers, and there are great pilgrimage places in India which attract both Hindus and Muslims. So there's a lot more coming together at the ground level than sometimes we see at the level of religious or political leadership. I have said to Hindu organizations here in the United States and elsewhere that the most important dialogue is also with the Muslims. And it is difficult in India, but I continuously call upon Hindus here in the United States to engage Muslims in dialogue as a model for what can, what can be shown to India. Unfortunately, even diasporic communities, both Hindus and Muslim diasporic communities are still deeply influenced by what's happening in the homeland, and don't always see that they can also change the nature of that discourse in a new place and embrace new opportunities to reach out to those that they have not traditionally reached out to. I hope so, but you've put your finger on really a challenging and very difficult issue, but we have to be hopeful. And we need religious leaders on both sides who are willing to take the risks. This is where it gets often very difficult. Leaders who must really lead and take the risks and be teachers of their communities, and to say that there's a different way to show us possibilities.
In that article that I mentioned at the beginning, No Religion is an Island, that this series is marking the 50th anniversary of that publication, Abraham Heschel says that the true test of a religious spirit is humility. And that humility is what manifests greatness of spirit. And Professor Ananta Ram Bachan, that's what you've done for us. I've known you to be a man of humility and a man of great spirit. Thank you for sharing your enlightenment with us, your wisdom. On behalf of Hans Gustafson, my colleague, and the St. Thomas community here, please know of our deep gratitude. And I want to say one last thing. You talked about risk. I want you to read, we don't have the book for sale here, do we, Hans? But I want you to look up Professor Ram Bachan's book, A Hindu Theology of Liberation. I mentioned earlier that it's an eloquent, insightful, I forget exactly what I said, a spiritually brilliant work that's accessible. It's also a work that manifests risks and courage. Thank you for all you've contributed. Please join us again sometime.